all started when we rolled in a real steel classic 55 Chevy down to the horsepower shop for a turbo-powered transformation. We removed the body from the Bel Air to swap its weak stock chassis with one we had custom made at Street Rod Garage. Then we got busy, building it up with lower and upper control arms, a Mustang 2 spindle, and a Flaming River manual rack and pinion system. After bolting up a front sway bar and bare brake rotors, we set the toe in and installed front Bilstein coilover shocks. Then out back, we bolted up an empty Curry rear end housing and moved on to a 4-link triangulated suspension and rear sway bar. We filled that housing with an Eaton Detroit locker set up with a 350 gear. Then with emergency brakes installed on the axles, we sent them home before bolting up the rear brakes. We dropped in a 22-gallon fuel tank from Rick's Hot Rod Shop that came loaded with a Weldon filter and pump. Finally, it was time to drop in a soon-to-be twin turbocharged 580 cubic inch big block. After mocking up a TCI 4L80E 6-speed transmission, the original old body came to rest on its brand new foundation. A lot of work done, a lot more to do before this classic Tri-5's a finished ferocious pavement pounder. So what's left? Under the hood, we've still got headers, our turbos, of course, intake manifold, cooling system, and our accessory drive. Inside the car, this big pile of wiring, a new AC system, our steering wheel, all kinds of trim pieces. Can't forget about that shiny new column there, and a whole new set of retro gauges.
This old dash got an upgrade back in the 80s when this type of paneling was pretty popular. But we're going to go ahead and upgrade it again and bring it to today's standards. Now that includes new paneling and gauges. And just because we're ripping all this old stuff out doesn't mean we're throwing it away. There's plenty of guys working on their own project that can use this stuff. I'm going to carefully remove all these gauges and dash pieces. It also leaves holes in the dash that'll come in handy in a minute. Since new carpet's on the way, we got to remove the front bench seat and the bottom back seat. Then of course the old carpet and steering column.
We're going to keep that old Chevy cool as well as classic. This is Vintage Air's Gen 4 kit, especially made for Tri-5 55 and 56 models. Now they made some improvements to make these kits more compact and easier to install. They have separate coils for heating and cooling, and this fall permanent magnetic blower. Now this thing installs with little or no cutting, but before this baby can go in, some more factory pieces have to come out. Like the OEM heater assembly, the aftermarket rat's nest, the heater blower, and the defroster duct unit that gets replaced by 2 defroster ducts and duct tubing from the kit. With brackets and hardlines attached, the evaporator unit goes up and under the dash from the passenger side, and you want to loosely secure it to the firewall and to the dash. Next, the driver and passenger side ball louvers can go in place. Then run a hose through an existing hole in the firewall and connect it to the evaporator drain outlet. Now you can cut, route, and connect all the hoses to the vents. We use the supplied wiring harness to connect the evaporator to the ECU and another wiring harness to connect the evaporator to the original control module. And since our carpet's going to be black, you guessed it, we're going to decorate our dash to match it with some Duplicolor. To bring these things up to date, we're mounting a new panel from Pete's Fabrications to the old bezel. They're made from billet aluminum, and we got ours preloaded with classic instrument gauges with a vintage look. Now we have to drill a few holes in the dashboard to make room for this. It's a 5-hole dash panel, also from Pete's, with gauges for oil, water temperature, boost, fuel, and voltage. Remember what that clock and speaker bezel used to look like? Well, check the difference after a little black and silver paint. Nice touch, if we do say so. Of course, the original clock goes back in as well. I Did It makes this replacement Tri-5 steering column, and we opted for the chrome-plated steel version. Well, next we're covering up the hole where the floor shifter used to be. Why?
Because we won't need it anymore. We're going to use this paddle shifter setup from TCI that's designed to work with their 6X transmission. Now this piece bolts directly to the steering column and it communicates with the control unit through a wireless signal. We'll deal with this in a little bit.
We're using direct replacement auto custom carpeting that Year One sent us, and it goes in easier if you let it lay flat for a day or so like we did. Then after a little trimming to get a proper fit, the finishing touch, a pair of bow tie door sills, again from Pete's. Well, that's it for the interior beauty. We'll turn our attention to the beast right after this. Welcome back to Horsepower's Tri-5 Transformation. You just saw us attack the interior for some cool upgrades, like the inside components of an AC system, a mix of old and new for the dash, and with new carpet laid down, this 55 interior is now looking almost show car sharp. What you didn't see was hours of bending and welding to fab up custom headers we just test fitted with our twin turbos. Fortunately, the fit was dead on. You also didn't see the firewall get a makeover by first applying some POWERNATION Marine Clean degreaser and cleaner. After washing it clean, we coated it with their metal-ready rust remover and pre-primer, leaving it on for about 15 minutes before another rinse. The final step, 2 coats of POWERNATION gloss black paint. This is a treatment that not only makes it look good, it prevents rust by keeping out moisture. Next on our punch list, the drive system, and Vintage Air makes one for the big block Chevy to include the water pump, this main bracket for the compressor, alternator, and everything else we need. With mounting studs in the engine, the first thing to go on is the water pump. Then, with spacers in place, the AC compressor and alternator assembly mounts to the studs. The tensioner may look pretty plain next to all that chrome, but not to worry. The kit includes this cool cover for it. Pulleys can go on now, first for the crank, the water pump, and another cool cover for the AC compressor. Finally, the serpentine belt gets routed and the drive system is done. Not to be outshined, our headers are back from NitroPlate, where they got a highly polished aluminum ceramic coating they call NitroPlate Bright. Now they can withstand up to 1,300 degrees of heat with excellent thermal properties to cut down underhood temperatures. That'll even help horsepower. The Turbonetic Super Ts are next. Each one has a 25 plus PSI capacity, so together they can make over 2,000 horsepower on this engine. Even running ours at about 5 PSI each, we should make close to $1,000.
The toughest part with fabricating our headers was avoiding interference with the steering shaft. Here's a little tip for keeping the steering safe. Remove one of the set screws and mark a spot with a pilot bit on the shaft. Then pull away the column so you can drill into the shaft with a larger bit. Put it back in position and the set screw goes into the column and it'll never pull out of place.
Here's how we'll keep the 55 cool. It's a handmade auto-rad radiator assembly with a complete core support that bolts right to the chassis and front fenders. To give ours the clearance we need though, we reversed the 14-inch fan location so they now push air instead of pulling it. The next step involves bolting up the Vintage Air condenser assembly to the inside of the core support and attaching the dryer.
Our Vintage Air kit came with all the stock style hard lines, but since we're far from that with the new core support, we're gonna have to make templates and send them down to the AC shop. When we do it that way, we're not without the car and we can keep on making progress. We're finally ready for that intake. It's an Edelbrock Victor Jr. designed for multi-port EFI. This tall deck manifold is designed for a basic operating range of 1,500 to 8,500 RPM. Before loading it with ARP bolts, we need to coat the threads with some Loctite NICs.
The Edelbrock aluminum fuel rails came with our intake, and for injectors, we used a little company we found at fuelsystems.biz. They turned us on to these from Simon that flow 80 pounds per hour, plenty to feed a hungry big block. 90mm throttle body. That's what it's going to take to feed a turbocharged monster big block like ours. This comes from AccuFab, and it's actually the application for a Fox body Mustang. It comes with provisions for an idle air bypass, we don't need that, and throttle position sensor, which we definitely got to have. Now it attaches to this elbow on top of our intake, which you definitely can't buy off the shelf. It was custom made by a little company called High Performance Controls, and well, after this step, you're on your own. Feeding charged air from the turbos to the intake now is all about creating a path of piping. In our case, using leftover 3-inch exhaust pieces, some couplers, and a lot of time and patience. Our 55 engine's almost buttoned up, and well, the whole car will be after many hours of plumbing and wiring and such. Hey, we've covered a lot of ground though, mainly showing you how you can take a classic steel body from a weak stock frame and put a modern firm foundation under it with brakes and suspension. Talk about your best of both worlds. Well, coming up, we got a little test to show you that involves a little part that plays a big role in keeping your engine together. Hey, welcome back to Horsepower and a little heads-up tech segment we're calling Bolt Basics. There are hundreds of bolts and studs in a typical engine. Stands to reason, then, that using the best quality fasteners, proper torque specs, and lube are critical to keeping everything together, especially for high-performance use and abuse. Of course, there's a lot more to it than knowing righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. In fact, what happens between the first twist of the bolt and that last click is often a mystery. All metals have some elastic properties, which means they can be compressed or, more importantly, stretched. When a bolt or stud is stretched, it has a natural tendency to return to its original length. That's why when you torque one down, you're trying to stretch it just enough to add a clamping force that'll keep it in place. This is also known as preload. Maintaining and achieving a bolt's proper clamp load is all about overcoming friction, and even ARPs can't do that without the right lube. There are a lot of choices out there, but using some of their studs and this strain gauge, we're going to test some different results. First, good old motor oil on the threads of this ARP stud and nut, which has a torque value of 125 foot-pounds. So when the torque wrench clicks, the gauge needle should be at 18,000 pounds. And on the first cycle, we're at 15,000, not enough. And eventually we do hit the target, but only after several cycles. Next, with a new identical stud and nut, the ever-popular Molly Lube. And once again, when the torque wrench says we're there, we're really 3,000 pounds under. Several cycles later, we're at 19.5, about 1,500 pounds over the target. This is a lube commonly called peanut butter. It's used by a lot of top fuel race teams who torque their stuff down once, make a 5-second pass, and then tear the engine down before the next run. I can see why they use it. It torques down at 18,000 pounds the first time. However, it's not recommended for street strip engines because on each follow-up cycle, the gauge goes up several thousand pounds above the target. On about the 7th cycle, we're all the way up to 30,000 pounds. Uh-oh, that wasn't the torque wrench. Now let's see what we got here. Now that sound was obviously threads letting go inside this nut, and it's not going anywhere. Imagine if this was in your engine. You'd be screwed, no pun intended. Finally, ARP's Ultra Torque Lube, made without moly or metals, and formulated to achieve the target preload on the first torque cycle with repeatability. Plus, it prevents seizing and galling on threads. On the first torque sequence, we're at 18.5, which is right in the ballpark. But ARP claims Ultra Lube will maintain that preload level within 5% on all following torque cycles. And it does on the second and the third, and for 2 more cycles before we call it quits. Other recent tests measuring rod bolt stretch with different lubes revealed pretty much the same results we got. So, while using quality fasteners and the proper torque specs are critical, it's the lube that lets you hit that target preload and hit it consistently. Today, this ARP Ultra Torque was the only one that really made the grade.
You're watching Horsepower. For a DVD copy of this episode, just go to PowerblockTV.com and order your copy for just $5.95 plus shipping and handling. Start your own Horsepower collection, delivered right to your door from the Power Block.
Here's a welcome blast from the past for anybody with a period-correct hot rod. Edelbrock's 94 two-barrel carburetor, discontinued in 1957, is back. Can't you see this baby on top of a flathead? Now it features a die-cast bowl and air horn, cast iron 3-bolt flange, and linkage that makes it for an easy setup in a 2 or 3 carb configuration. Now, while it looks the same as the old days, well, the price has probably gone up a bit, $350 bucks. You know, I hate to give him the big head, but Mr. Mike's done some pretty ingenious work constructing all that turbo tubing. Check out the T-connection with a fitting for the blow-off valve. Not bad. Can you imagine the underhood heat these turbos are going to turn out, though? Well, that's why a pair of these titanium shields that DEI makes is a pretty cool idea. They can handle up to 1,800 degrees of direct heat. It can also increase horsepower and reduce turbo lag. Well, header heat's another source of high-temp troubles under your hood. We've used this DEI header wrap in our own dyno where it proved to reduce temperatures considerably. It's also good for improving exhaust scavenging. Well, another way to reduce underhood heat is their Reflecta-Cool. You just trim this stuff to size and apply it to the underside of your hood with a self-adhesive backing. They also make this sleeving kit that protects ignition wires from heat in style. It's made from the same high-temp composite fiberglass as their boot covers. It installs easily and, well, even comes with these shrink tubes for a kind of a sharp finish look. What do you think? Well, outside of the engine bay, a heat screen is a matting that's made of aluminized mylar, and you can use this stuff under your carpet to protect your interior or in body panels to protect painted surfaces. These are all hot parts designed to beat the heat, one of your street machine's enemies.
We know some of you guys are asking yourselves, where's the intercooler? Well, the answer is, these turbos are so efficient and we'll only be making about 10 total pounds of boost to reach our 1,000 horsepower goal. We're not gonna have that much air charge temp. Now, by the time that mixes with the fuel in the runner, they're gonna be pretty low. Now, if you guys are planning on adding a single turbo or even twins to your engine, here's a way to take some of the mystery out of what you'll need to reach your power levels. All you need to do is call Turbonetics and give them the information about your engine. They'll send you a chart that shows you what kind of horsepower to expect at various boost levels, with and without an intercooler. When you're building a project with this much power, there's a lot of small details you have to deal with, and we just don't have enough time to show them all. But the next time you see this thing, we're gonna show you how to tune it, and most importantly, we're gonna have some fun with it. After all, it is the ultimate sleeper. We'll see you next week.